Hey, I'm Noah.
And I'm Adam, and I have innovated the use of the chair. The only downside is that it forces me to bend over the armrest on this and both put a pain in my side and damage the chair. Probably not such a good idea after all. Anyway, what are we reviewing right now?
Well, we're reviewing more of DC's New 52 relaunch. Two more comics. Demon Knight and Batwoman. So what do you want to start with?
I would start with Demon Knights, just because
Oh.
that's... I think that's Batwoman, and I think that is Demon Knights.
Okay.
Because I have to say, I am in love with this cover. It's just so...
It is a cool cover.
Yeah, it's... And also, I think that we've complained about some covers before, not so much that they looked bad or that they were boring or something, but that they didn't really accurately represent what you were getting inside.
This one does.
This is a bit Etrigan heavy, but at the same time, it's kind of, I think, sending the right message.
Mm-hmm.
I love the font, even.
Yeah, with the O.
It has an O. Anyway, what is Demon Knights about? Should I talk about it, or should you?
You do it.
Alright. So, Demon Knights takes place quite a long time ago. We had a bit of a discussion about the timeline. We're not entirely sure how in line with European history the writers are. Then again, at the same time, we're talking about mythology anyhow, so you can't really be too specific. When exactly was the fall of Camelot? The answer is, never really happened. So I guess we have some leniency. We're back in the Dark Ages, essentially, and we have, I would say, not even necessarily as our protagonist, but as one of our main characters, Jason Blood, who we have just seen being affixed with the demon Etrigan by Merlin for the first time in this. So we're going way back to when this happened. He and Xanadu, they've been around for 400 years. They're going all over the place. They go to an inn. They meet a bunch of other people,
Including one person in particular who's...
more than one person. They meet Shining Knight. They meet a particularly savage vandal, and many more. And also,
That was smooth.
and right now, right now in the story, what they need to do is they need to defend the inn because the town is being attacked by Mordru's army. That's Mordru the Sorcerer. So we've really got all of these sort of magical DC characters who come from back during this time period, but we're seeing them all in their own element, and in their time period, and in just kind of this crazy fantasy world. And
Yeah.
I am in a lot of pain, so I'm going to change my seat.
Okay. So, this isn't so much a superhero comic. Like,
Not at all.
Not at all, really. It's just a very high fantasy comic. It's, it's kind of Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, that, type of setting, but it isn't that deep or doesn't have that much drama.
Yeah.
It is just an action I'd say it's more like a comic version of Dungeons and Dragons and something, of these different people. They're all grouping, they're one group and they're just adventuring together, and whatever pops up, they have to fight it.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the sword and sorcery. You've got that going on. But unlike a lot of the sort of bigger fantasy stories that we may think of, it's not some kind of an epic fate of the world type serious quest. It's more...
They throw dragons at shit.
Yeah, it's... We throw dragons at them,
Yeah.
is one of the lines in there. Is probably one of the most awesome lines, just standalone lines that I've read in any of these books
Yeah.
in the past 2 weeks. It's... I'm not gonna... It is silly. It's not stupid, though. I mean, it's not like Deathstroke, where it was just kind of... You have to laugh at it as
Yeah.
long as you're going to laugh along with it. It's just more lighthearted, I would
Yeah.
say. It's relaxed. Relaxed? I mean, demons fighting people. How relaxing can that be?
But it was fun. It was just kind of fun.
It's fun, it's enjoyable, but there are story elements. It's like
Yeah.
these characters who do know each other, we can see how they relate to each other. It's funny, but you've got, like, Xanadu and Jason Blood are fighting with each other, like Jason Blood is too much of a coward, etc. Meanwhile, apparently Xanadu is cheating on Jason with Etrigan. I would love to see where that goes.
Yeah.
And we've got lots of drunk people, lots of people who want to be drunk but aren't drunk enough.
Everyone's speaking in kind of, early modern-y English,
And-
Shakespeare type English.
Yeah, that actually, if we're talking about historical accuracy, this would have been, they shouldn't be speaking in modern English at all. But I guess we can suspend
yeah.
our disbelief. That is one thing that I must object to, though. Not must, but choose to object to. Etrigan does not speak in rhyme or iambic pentameter. He just kind of talks.
Yeah.
But one thing I do like, and this is a touch that I see very often, but when people speak, their fonts will kind of reflect the type of language that they're using. Like Etrigan and Merlin have their own fonts that are separate from the other characters. So I think it's very enjoyable. It's not a story that I would say is the most emotionally captivating right now or the most dramatic necessarily, but I think it could evolve into something very fun. And with these kinds of things, you can never be sure because these kinds of things can spawn or can develop into surprisingly surprisingly deep, surprisingly captivated, and surprisingly dramatic stories. So I'd say it's worth checking out if that's the kind of thing you like. If you're not into fantasy, or if you want something more very grounded in drama, I would say don't check it out. But if you're curious, I would say it's worth a look. I'm probably going to be checking out the next issue. And I would say even if you don't, I would say check back in a few months and just see where it's gone, because this could be done really well.
Do you want to talk about the art?
I would love to talk about the art. Would you like to start?
Yeah, the art, very high fantasy, very, it's magic-y, it's bright, it's fun art. It's like fun, interesting, it's fun, interesting art that, it's not superhero-y art, it is fantasy art.
It's magic.
Yeah, it's like stuff you'd find on Magic the Gathering cards, or stuff like that, where it's more detailed, but also it still holds that, magic-y, just look to it.
Yeah, and I mean, and we do have, again, the greens, the purples, all the crazy spells and light. And
there's a lot of detail going on in the background.
It's very detailed, and I think also, and when we get to like the village, we've got kind of that sort of
lush greens, we've got nice forest scenery. Yeah,
we've got that. It sets up that sword and sorcery fantasy environment. So it's odd. One thing also, this I think might be my biggest difficulty here is placing this on the timeline, because it starts 400 years ago from when the main story takes place, but the main story now is the Dark Ages, and 400 years ago was the fall of Camelot. So it's like,
we're not sure if this is...
Yeah, it's hard to figure out exactly.
If they're crusading or...
Yeah, it seems to be like pre-crusade.
But the first crusade was in 1000 AD, so...
And when did the first Camelot story appear?
12th century.
I thought it was the 13th century.
No, 12th century.
Oh, the 12th century.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but...
It's hard to place on the... But of course, it is all fiction anyway, so it doesn't...
It's kind of sad that we're not history buffs, but we have the sense of propriety that one might. So we'll look into that a little bit more. So,
but it is a fun book, and I enjoyed it.
Where, like, on a letter scale would you...
I'd give it an A.
You'd give it an A?
I'd give it an A because I enjoy high fantasy type stuff. This does it really well, and it's not like the other comics, but it does its own thing. It does it really well. So yeah, an A. I liked reading it. I had fun.
Yeah, and also, I would say, not necessarily as much as others. There are a few titles that I'm probably not going to be picking up, but that are examples of how DC can kind of branch out away from the superhero thing.
All-Star Western.
I was going to say, while keeping in the same universe, not supposedly, but while technically within the same universe, focusing on things that are very different from what you might expect, that they do All-Star Western, they do, I know Men of War is part of the relaunch. So, and this is, I think I would group it with those kinds of comics, that it's just a departure. I think that right now, although it's enjoyable, it is kind of shallow, so I'm not going to put it as high as Noah necessarily did. I'd probably go with, I'd say maybe a B. I think it's either worth checking out, or even if not, I think worth sticking around to see where it goes, because I think it could be something really, really interesting. But we're going to have to wait and see with that.
Yeah.
And
now we're
moving on to something completely different, but I'm not going to say any worse.
Batwoman.
Batwoman.
So,
there is... The things to say about this, I would say this is probably...
the artsiest comic.
the artsiest that we've talked about so far.
And you can tell just from the cover.
Yeah.
And you have the credits just right under. They're not over here or over here. They're just kind of right under. They get pretty much second billing.
Visually, this is one of the most, if not avant-garde, at least the most non-conventional. I mean, it doesn't completely eschew the comic form and structure, but it takes some creative liberties. Do we want to talk about the story a bit?
Okay, I guess I'll do it. You did the last one.
Cool.
So the story, it starts off with this Mexican or somehow Spanish-speaking South American family getting kind of haunted by a type of like Mexican banshee type spirit. Batwoman swings in, saves the day, but their son or daughter,
Their 3 children.
their 3 children are still kind of taken by the banshee, and we're not sure if they were killed or just kidnapped. Then Batwoman runs into some old.
And also, I would like to add that it's interspersed with. It's told by the victims, but it's interspersed between seeing what's actually happening, which is then from their perspective, and seeing them being interviewed by a police detective.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of, we're not sure if what we're seeing is what actually happened or if it's just their impression of what actually happened. So there's that ambiguity there. So keep going.
So then we see Batwoman as Kane. What's her?
Kathy Kane.
Kathy Kane. I want to say Cassandra, but that's the wrong Kane. There are a lot of Kanes in the DC.
Bob Kane.
Yep. There we go. But yeah, so we see Kathy Kane, who is the Batwoman. We see her kind of meeting an old pal, an old romance, I guess.
Yeah, and she is, I'm trying to find her name, she is the police detective who is interviewing the people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Detective Sawyer. I'm not terribly familiar with who she is.
Me neither. So we see her kind of reintroduce. No.
Do you want to try that again?
How about you take it from here?
Alright. But she does come to the police station. She's meeting with this Detective Sawyer. Also, it's hinted at that this Batwoman, this Kathy Kane, has had a romantic relationship in the past with Detective Montoya, who appears only as a photograph in this, but she seems to be being introduced as part of the story. It's not clear how much, but on some level. Do you want to continue from there?
Okay. So after that, we see Batwoman go on patrol again, this time with her sidekick.
Yeah, her niece, Betty Kane.
Her niece, Betty Kane, who, drop it. But her niece, Betty Kane, they go on patrol, and they're kind of bickering a lot like Batman and Robin did in Batman and Robin. We'll talk about how they pull it off with our impressions.
Yeah.
And then we're kind of taken from their patrol. We're introduced to Black Mask and Detective Agent Scully.
Yes, Detective Agent Scully appears in this.
Well, she's given another name.
I call her Detective Agent Scully because she is clearly Detective Agent Scully.
She's called Agent Chase in this, and Black Mask, who's the head of a department of something or other,
he's interested in some goings-on.
He's interested in some goings-on in Gotham, involving Batwoman.
And then, I mean, that we did end up covering a lot, but there's not. It's a lot more detailed than what we just said. Yeah. And then from there, the mystery kind of develops further, and we see more with kind of the relationships that these characters have to each other. And we get a little bit more of a look at Kathy Kane's past. So that seems to be mostly what, that's most of the story. Yeah. Again, I know we covered probably a bit more in that than we usually do, but just talking about it does not really begin to touch on what's actually the substance of it.
And I think the reason that we did, go a bit further is because that the story is a bit hard to follow, honestly. There's just so much kind of happening, and it's not that confusing. It's just that the way that the book is kind of stylized, because the art is like a main focus, that the words kind of wrap around the art instead of the art fitting to the words.
Yeah,
really. There's stuff where you have to read instead of just.
That's a good example.
The page you were just on. with the kicking through the window.
There are some pages where, for example, there will be a
You have
panel. There would be a panel that goes across the page, but then other panels that don't go across
So
the page.
you have to read, like this one, you have to read top first and then left to right.
Yeah, and that's I think even
Like,
a. And
that's, no, I'm doing it backwards. Badum, and then whatever.
And I mean, I
You
think
get it.
that's even easier than other things where, for example, the panels will be circled around a single centerpiece, which you also
Yeah.
need to be able to. And
So it's a bit hard to read.
Yeah, it's not.
But it's not confusing.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's difficult to follow, but it does. You have to pay attention. You have to be a bit conscious of what you're looking for. But overall, in terms of first story, do you want me to start with my impressions, or do you want to?
I'll just go ahead with mine because you're gonna do most of it. I just want to kind of, you'll flesh out what I'd probably say. It's a good story. There's a lot of elements introduced, but it's interesting. There's a mystery of what's happening to the children, if they're actually being murdered or just kind of being kidnapped. You're kind of interested in who the characters are because you get hints of what happened, and you're told a little bit of their past, but they have these personalities that obviously reflect a lot more than just what is seen or what is heard so far. They interact very well with each other. The writing is very good. You definitely see a lot of their personality through how they talk and how they interact with other people. And just a lot is happening that you do want to find out. It's not an overload like Stormwatch was. But a lot is happening, and you just want to find out how it all blends together and what happens.
Yeah, I would say that it seems like a setup to a very big story.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of things, because we're more than most of these first issues that we've read. We're introduced to a lot of things. There's the main plot element of the children who are disappearing, which it seems like it should be the crux of the story, but it's not really what we're focusing on mostly, because there's also things like Kathy and Betty's Kane relationship to each other. We're looking at bits of Batwoman's past and present romantic interests, and also we have the business with Black Mask going on. We're not sure how that's connected necessarily, and we see the relationship between Batwoman and her father and the rest of her family. It's there's a lot of characters being introduced, a lot of ideas being introduced, but I don't think it feels too cluttered.
No.
I think that
it fits very organically.
Yeah, I wouldn't say... I think the arc of the story itself gets a little bit over the place, but I think that if we're doing a mostly expositional first issue, I think it works better than a lot of the other mostly expositional first issues we've seen, because we're still... I think what the reason it appeals to me is that I'm still drawn in from the very beginning.
Me too.
But I think a lot of that, in addition to the writing, which is not bad at all, but I think a lot of that and a lot of what really carries the book is visual. I think it really falls on the art very heavily. Do you want to start talking a bit about that?
So, like we said in the beginning, this is kind of the most artsy book that we have come across so far. It's kind of the opposite of Frankenstein or Static Shock. Everything is in such great detail, and there are different styles of art featured throughout the book. Like this is kind of a watercolor, kind of inky painting type thing.
I don't know why she's doing the voodoo pose. But
then you have stuff that is more comic-y, like this page, which I've already shown, kind of the big splash page.
And then even the contrast between just the two time periods.
Yeah, and then you have...
on one page.
Where's the Black Mask part?
Well, I think we already showed that, though. We could...
Yeah, but I
want to talk about it when I
show
find
it
it
again. The Black Mask bit, it gets into this kind of... It makes the Black Mask look really scary and gruesome and dark, and there's a lot of playing with the light in that scene. But meanwhile, the details on that are more sparse, and everything looks kind of more, like there's, like you can see, there's like almost no shading here. It's just kind of one color for the skin, and then another for the hair, and the lines are very thin. So it combines kind of all these different styles, but they all fit very well together, and they all look very good. They're all very pretty, beautiful styles, very well drawn, very well colored. Probably, I'd say this is the best looking comic I've read so far.
I would say definitely. I mean, I think that maybe just in terms of prettiness, Batwing was also very pretty looking
But Batwing
in a
had
very
a very
different way.
set style.
It did, but I think that this is actually much more effective in telling the story. I think with Batwing, it was just some good-looking images. It was also very sparse, as opposed to this, which is almost the opposite. It goes really heavy into detail. I
And
mean,
you can look at just the fonts too of the, like just here, just the fonts are so fluid, you know, and they fit they're not like the words look like they would fit in the image instead of just being overlaid upon them.
yeah, but and I think as far as just the images carrying the story, definitely more so than anything else that we've read so far. Actually, I'm still going to be referencing this because I think that, for example, we begin with this really ghostly figure kind of haunting these people, and I could picture that being done, and it's fairly short. It's a fairly small portion of the comic. I could picture that being done in a lot of the other books that we've read, and it just seeming like, okay, here's the action scene starting. But with just this sort of spectral imagery, not only is it really, really haunting and really making an impact from the very first few pages, but it's also, I think, giving a lot of life and a lot of character to what's going on. That, and especially because, and this is the way it works with the writing, that's being told from the person who's being haunted, from that person's perspective. So beyond just missing children, it's just something really spooky and something that's clearly not right going on around here. Can I just say one more thing on, especially on that note? I don't think that. Not I don't think. I don't necessarily like when comics tend to reference different styles of art and different iconography that exists outside of the story that's being told. Not that I don't think that can work sometimes, but I think that too often writers and artists kind of get too caught up in imagery and end up losing track of the story, or at least in my experience there have been some books like that. But with this, we get, especially on, I think, one of the pages that we showed earlier, this death, this skull, this sort of Mexican Day of the Dead type imagery. It has a very sort of, I'd say Latin, but really specifically Mexican element to it. And in terms of story, that also is a part. We have here just sort of the weeping skull and fish. And I mean, it's getting into that sort of abstract kind of area, or images that are abstractions of ideas. But I think it works because it really, like with Mr. Terrific, I was saying that I'm seeing this story, but there's nothing about it that's really going to engage me. I think that the tone and just sort of the mystery and really the eeriness of it is very much being shown through the art, but that's a good thing because I think it does everything that it can to underscore the idea of children being kidnapped and murdered and going missing. Because I think that if you play it, it's not that it's purely supernatural, but I think that the supernatural elements reflect all of the most serious, tangible, real, spooky elements of something as simple as child kidnapping and murder.
And if I could go off that, like on the same page that, you know, he referenced before, it's not just the ghost that looks spooky. It's like the whole spookiness. Batwoman looks scary. Batwoman looks, you know, ghosty. It's like the whole. It's all kind of shared. All the visual and the tone is shared throughout the page.
Yeah, and I mean,
it's all very unified.
And I'm not going to say that the art is perfect. I think there are a few things that I don't necessarily like as much. Not that I think it hurts it, but I think overall there are a few small details that probably don't add as much as they seem. They stand out more than they add anything. I mean, for example, Batwoman has this incredibly white skin and this incredibly red hair. I'm not entirely sure why that is. If there is a reason in context and story that has happened before that she has these features, then just forget everything I'm about to say. But I think that it stands out in a way that might not be the best because it doesn't really... It just makes me wonder why, as opposed to making me think anything in particular relating this. Also, it kind of seems odd because it would make her seem more... It's something that someone could be very easily identified by, so you wonder And also, there's this one scene where, like, and she's looking at photos on the wall of different police officers, and she sees Renee Montoya, and then in the next panel, everything goes white except for that one image. I mean, that also seems a little bit kind of like it's hitting you over the head a bit, even though, I mean, stylistically, again, it doesn't hurt, but it's just a little thing that stands out. But again, that's not to say that visually it's bad at all. And then there are just a few moments where, not that it gets hard to follow, but that you need to pay attention to what you're looking at. You can't just look at one page. You have to look at, I say on almost every page, you need to look at both pages before you start reading one page, as opposed to starting on one page and then trying to move on to the next one. So yeah, I think that's pretty much what I have to say about the art. So is there anything else about this that we want to comment on?
Well, letter grade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think before we get to that, just one little detail. Also, in terms of characterization, I think that we really we find out things about Batwoman. There's a big element of mystery, but mystery to who she is, and we're getting little pieces. But there are some small things that make a very significant impact. For example, the person who's at the beginning talking to the police mentions that Batwoman waited with them until they heard police sirens, and then she fled. So just little elements like that, I think, show a lot about who this character is. And also she promises she's going to get whoever's been stealing these children, and then the detective says, that's very unprofessional and unethical. She shouldn't be doing that. I'm not going to promise anything, but we're going to try our hardest. And I'm sure the way that we're setting things up, it seems like she's also going to be a big part of this. So it's setting up for a really big story, but even then it's not losing sight of the little details that are going to be shading that story as we go along.
Letter grade?
Letter grade, yeah. Where would you...
I'd give it an A.
You would give it an A?
I'd give it another A, yeah.
You're giving a lot of A's.
Just the last two.
Yeah, I would say probably B, B+. Because again, I think that it's not that the story is bad, it's not that the story structure is bad, but since this is something where we're getting so much information, it does feel kind of like we're jumping around a little bit. So I don't necessarily think it's as smooth in terms of the issue itself as it could be, so I'm not going to say that it's an A. It's something that you really need to... You probably need to read it, then go back and read it again and break it down and look at the little parts and elements of it to really follow everything and make sure that you got everything, because there's a lot that's being focused on, and it's not flowing from one idea to the next in the most accessible way. So that's not to say that it's bad or ineffective, but I don't think it's done as well as it maybe could be. So
I'm looking, kind of despite the fact that some parts are hard to follow, the rest of it works so well, and even though it still has all these ideas, it's just that those few little mess-ups I could totally brush over them because the rest of it is done just so competently.
Well, I think we have different preferences. So, and are you going to be looking at the next issue?
Yeah, I'll pick up the next issue, definitely.
I am going to let him pick up the next issue, and then I'm going to read it after he's done with it.
Okay. Sounds good. So, next
What
comics.
do we have left? We have 3 comics left. We can either do one 3-part review, or a 2-part and then a 1-part.
Well, there is something I want to get at the end of the reviews.
So do you want to do...
The next one will be the last 2-parter of this week, which will be...
Superboy and... Actually, no, how about this? How about...
No,
Alright, how about Superboy and Grifter?
Yep. So we'll see you next video with Superboy and Grifter.